Hey everybody, my name is Paul Lesden Jr., aka Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com. We're streaming live simultaneously in 3 different locations. Technology at Twitter at BoyGreen25, of course, over 10,000 followers. Thanks, fans. Flex. Of course, we're also on the Heavy on Jets Facebook page to over 30,000 New York Jet fans. Thanks for taking the time. And of course, like I said, on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/BoyGreen25. Before we go further, like the video, hit subscribe down below for more great content. Now, the hire that got all the buzz and all the what the heck was Nathaniel Hackett being the OC. But also, aside in the subline, was the Jets hiring Keith Carter, the new offensive line coach and run game coordinator for the New York Jets. And a lot of people were like, who the hell is Keith Carter? And I knew immediately who to call to find the answers to some of these questions. And it's my main man, Mike Herndon. We had him on a couple years ago for the Corey Davis stuff. More on that later. And now he's the columnist at paulkaharski.com covering all things Tennessee Titans. So without further ado, Mike Herndon graces us with his presence. What's up, Mikey?
Hey, I'm doing well. Doing well. How about you?
Well, I'm doing spectacular. So, Mike, it's great to see you. I always love when any Jets-Titan connections happen. I'm like, booyah, we know exactly where to go. So let's start off with this. I guess I'll start with the end to try to work our way back to the beginning. I mean, I guess the only reason Keith Carter was available was because he was fired, I guess, by the Tennessee Titans. So I guess we'll start with that. What went wrong? Because he was there for, 5+ years? I mean, he was there with Tennessee. What went wrong where ultimately he ended up getting fired?
So the offensive line performance in Tennessee was really, really bad in 2022. So it was probably the worst unit on the team. Now, that is certainly not all Keith Carter's fault. And I think it's easy to blame the position coach when a unit's just really bad generally. But Dennis Daly, who started for Taylor Lewan got injured in the second game of the year. Dennis Daly, who they plugged in there, was overmatched and terrible all season. I think that was a John Robinson problem, not a Keith Carter problem. They started a left guard named Aaron Brewer, who come into the league at like 6'1", 274 pounds. I think he was up to 290, but he was still just like super undersized. Always really struggled with length and power, especially in pass rush situations. Was a good run blocker, and I think that's to Keith Carter's credit. He was able to make Aaron Brewer into a good run blocker, but really struggled in pass protection. Ben Jones and Nate Davis, the two good offensive linemen that they had, struggled with injuries towards the back half of the year. And then their right tackle was a third-round rookie, Nicholas Petit-Frere, who was kind of up and down, but ideally, your rookie third-round tackle would be your weak link on your offensive line. He was their probably third best offensive lineman for most of the season, and that was a major problem. So I don't necessarily think it was a Keith Carter problem so much as it was just a talent and roster building problem, because they'd let this thing atrophy over the years. I mean, it started when they let Jack Conklin walk. I think that was in 2019, I believe they let him go.
Yeah.
And then they had Lewan, has been in and out of the lineup with injuries the last 3 or 4 years. He's a really good player when he's out there, but he's just, he had back-to-back knee ACL season enders now. He had, concussion issues at some point. So he has become less and less reliable over the last few years. And then left guard, they let Roger Saffold walk, which was fine. Roger Saffold was getting a little bit older. He had started to struggle in pass protection, was struggling with his own injury issues, with his shoulders being banged up constantly. But they didn't go and replace him. They just elevated this undrafted guy, Aaron Brewer, who just was not ready to be an NFL starter. So that's the reason I will say that's the reason a lot of people will tell you Keith Carter got fired. The reason I think Keith Carter got fired is simply because they were going in a new direction on offense. They fired Todd Downing, the offensive coordinator. I think they're going to hire outside of the organization. I don't think they're just going to elevate Tim Kelly, which is what some people would have thought. Before the season was the plan. So I think they're going to go in a new direction on offense, and they're going to want somebody who will take them in that new direction along with the offensive coordinator. Because to me, offensive line coach, offensive coordinator have to be in sync. And Mike Vrabel even said that in the recent Rand Carthon introductory press conference. He said, when I hired Keith Carter as my first time hiring an offensive staff, he hired Keith Carter initially for Matt LaFleur. That is why Keith Carter was in Tennessee, was because he had worked with Matt LaFleur in Atlanta. Matt LaFleur came over to be the offensive coordinator. He wanted to pair him with an offensive line coach that he could trust. Carter was that guy. So he comes in. LaFleur goes on to take the Green Bay job. They promoted from within with Arthur Smith, had a ton of success with him and Keith Carter. And Keith Carter has always kind of been the de facto run game coordinator in Tennessee. He's never had that title before, but that's always kind of been his role. And they had a lot of success, but then they go to Todd Downing and everything's just kind of falling apart, as has the roster. So to me, I think this is all about Vrabel saying, I need my new offensive coordinator and my new offensive line coach to be singing from the same sheet of music here. And, he doesn't think keeping Keith Carter around is going to benefit that situation. So I think that's why he ultimately got fired, was just they're going in a different direction. It doesn't make sense to keep him.
That is the first time in my life that I've ever heard that phrase used, singing from the same, sheet of music. That sounds beautiful. I loved it. I'm gonna note it. My great producer team behind the scenes. Yeah, let's mark that one. That one's juicy. I like that one. Another thing I have to bring up here, and it's interesting, is when Keith Carter was fired by the Titans. Taylor Lewan has this huge podcast and everybody goes crazy on the podcast. Taylor Lewan had this clip that, as soon as Keith Carter was fired and the Jets hired him, Jet fans are, Twitter searching, okay, who the hell is Keith Carter and what can they find at him? And they stumbled upon this Taylor Lewan clip that was shortly after Keith Carter was fired. And he talked about Taylor Lewan in this clip. And I'm intrigued to hear more about it because it's just one clip. It's hard to really understand fully what he means. But he said that, Keith Carter basically was a dick. He was a dictator kind of guy that came in that rubbed people the wrong way. And Taylor Lewan said, he always had these quote unquote unrealistic expectations for the line that no matter what we did, it was never good enough. And Taylor said, it'd be nice to get a pat on the back every once in a while. Hey, we're in 2023. Doesn't everybody need a couple of those cookies, I guess, on the old dinner plate? What do you make of that? Was that just a Taylor Lewan problem? Was that a problem that kind of permeated throughout the offensive line room and they all kind of felt similarly? Have you heard anything about that criticism in particular?
Yeah, and that's kind of been a running thing with Keith Carter. Actually, just going back all the way to his first year. His first year, he and Taylor Lewan were always kind of oil and water from a personality standpoint. I remember distinctly being at a training camp practice in 2018 when he had just been hired. He was brand new on staff. This was one of the first practices of that first training camp with this staff. And Lewan, he didn't like the way Lewan gave a rep. And it was not Lewan doing the rep. Lewan was just holding a bag. But he didn't like the way Lewan gave the rep to his teammate. And he asked him to do it again. This was right after the Titans had just given Taylor Lewan the biggest offensive line contract in the history of the NFL. It's like $80 million or whatever. Now it's been surpassed since, but at the time it was a huge deal. And Lewan didn't like him calling him out and making him redo this rep for some guy that was probably going to be cut. I can't remember who the offensive lineman was that was working with him, but it was almost certainly a guy that was going to be cut. And Lewan didn't like it. And so on the next rep, the guy hits the bag and Lewan does this comical, just throws himself in the air, falls on the ground. It looked like a WWE stunt, So Carter jumps all over him. So they're going to the next drill. They're running across the field. The whole time they are yelling at each other. And I just remember it just clear as day, this being like this big blow up. And there was, a little bit of talk about it at training camp about what was that all about? Lewan and Carter both got asked about it the next time they were available. And it, neither one of them really publicly commented on it much, but Lewan's been pretty consistent in his discussions. He's pretty honest. He's pretty open book on that podcast, actually, about how he feels. And he has been pretty clear that, I think he preferred Russ Grimm, who was the offensive line coach here previous to Keith Carter. He preferred him, from a style standpoint. He was obviously a former offensive lineman, which Carter wasn't. I think there was just some sort of respect level there between those two that it would have always made the next guy coming in tough for Lewan. But I think Carter is kind of a dick. I think he is a hard ass. He's definitely a drill sergeant type. I mean, that was something that always stood out to me watching practices. Was Carter was the coach that you could hear the most when they would break up to the position drills. Carter was yelling at the top of his lungs, very demanding, pushing the guys. And that's good sometimes. I mean, it depends on the makeup of the unit and things like that. But it's certainly not universally a bad thing. But I just think there may have been some times where he pushed too hard, and there are some instances. There have been some strange instances in the Titans offensive line room over the last few years. Ty Sambrailo, who actually was a really good swing tackle for them for a year, ended up quitting in the middle of a season out of nowhere, it seemed. They've also had guys like Kendall Lamb and the most recent one, Jamarco Jones, who were signed. And look, they weren't signed with the idea that these were going to be like staple starters on the offensive line, but they were expected to, probably take a starting job or at least compete for a starting job, who just never seemed to click. I mean, I remember Jamarco Jones got in some sort of altercation early in camp, and then we just never kind of heard from him again. I mean, he disappeared. He went on IR, and then we just never saw him again. So there's been some strange stuff like that has popped up over the years, but I think it's a personality thing, and it depends on who the people are in that Jets offensive line room as far as what those players are like, what they respond to as individuals. I mean, me personally, I don't particularly love that style of coaching where you're just constantly being told what a shitty player you are and that kind of thing. I didn't respond to that super well as a player when I was in my puny little career in high school football.
Yeah.
But some people do. Some people like that pushes them and motivates them and pisses them off. And so I think it depends entirely on the personality mix. And I also think at some point that can outweigh, or that can, like, if you're consistent with that, it can wear on you over time. And I kind of think that was another part of the firing, was maybe that, when you do that kind of act for 5 years in a row, and you've got guys like Taylor Lewan and Ben Jones who have been in that room the whole time, and Nate Davis who's been in there nearly the whole time, you kind of can grate on some people at some point, and you do need that pat on the back, or occasionally be told you're not the worst guy in the world. So yeah, I think there may have been some bit of outstaying his welcome as far as that kind of personality went.
That is fascinating, because back in my high school career, I was the opposite in the very short tenure of that Hall of Fame, I'm sure, career from back then, was that I had coaches that used to, and now I guess you can't do that anymore, grab your face mask and call you a piece of trash and then get your ass back over there and all that. Like, I love that. I was in a military family, so I guess I was just used to all that. So, okay, sounds good to me. I guess I got to go do one of these, but I can understand how that kind of stuff will rub you the wrong way, which sets up interestingly for like a guy like Mekhi Becton. I can only imagine how that potentially could all mix. And another fascinating nugget here is that, for people who don't know, Keith Carter and Robert Saleh connected way back from their Seattle days. They spent, I think it was 2 years together in Seattle when they won the Super Bowl. So that was the connection over a decade ago. And the interesting thing is, Robert Saleh is not a yeller. He has actually gone to press conferences, and when media people said, "Hey, come on, you got to rip into their ass and do something," like, and Saleh goes, "Nah, that's not my MO. Like, we're all adults here. That's not my job. If they need that to motivate them, they shouldn't be on the team." So I wonder how that's going to be, because he knows Keith Carter, obviously. I wonder how he, being the bad guy, good cop, bad cop, maybe, I don't know, as that dynamic potentially working in training camp. That's interesting, because that hasn't been Saleh's MO. That's fascinating.
And for what it's worth, Lewan did say, that their relationship has gotten better over the years. I know they were not great at first, but it has gotten better. I think there's at least some mutual respect there at this point. Not, even if they aren't, best buds, hanging out outside the facility.
No, that's a good point too, because in the same clip that Lewan kind of rips into him and calls him a dick, like, he says he's a good coach, he's going to get another job. And again, this is very fresh after Keith Carter was fired. He said, at least in that 2-minute clip, at least 6 or 7 times how good of a coach he is, he's going to get it. And he says, you know what? And to your point, that the relationship has gotten better since then. So that's really good to hear. So I have to ask the next question that a lot of Jet fans are saying, and I think a lot of people say in certain situations. It goes back to me. Adam Gase with the Denver Broncos. Yeah, look what he did with Peyton Manning. Yeah, sure. Mike Herndon and Boy Green could have done pretty good with Peyton Manning as a coach. So we've heard that a few times over the course of history. Nathaniel Hackett, the Jets OC. Look what he did with Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, it's Aaron Rodgers. So then again, we naturally progress to this with Keith Carter. How much credit does he deserve for Derrick Henry being Derrick Henry and the success that they thus had during that run where those two obviously were together.
I think he probably deserves some credit for that. I mean, Derrick Henry is an alien. He is going to be very difficult to replicate. Especially when, I'm not sure he's totally still in his prime at this point. But his 2019 and 2020 seasons,
Jeez,
I mean, unbelievable. So I don't. That is Derrick Henry being an alien to some degree, but
okay,
I do think Keith Carter. To me, I think his work developing Nate Davis is one of the more promising parts of Keith Carter's resume to me, because Nate Davis was a 3rd-round pick out of Charlotte. They plugged him in at right guard, and by the end of his rookie season, he was playing really good football, and he's turned into a really good right guard for them. Now, injuries have held him back a little bit from really reaching that potential. And he's going to be a free agent this year. So we'll be very interested to see, whether he sticks around here or goes elsewhere or whatever happens there. But he did a good job developing Nate Davis. Nate Davis improved a lot during his time here. Ben Jones improved a lot during his time here. When he was hired, a lot of Titans fans were ready to get rid of Ben Jones. I mean, when he got a contract extension, the pitchforks were lit, or the torches were lit, and the pitchforks were out. And people were ready to storm St. Thomas Sports Park for why would you extend this terrible center? Well, it turns out Ben Jones was actually a good center. He just needed, better play around him, better support around him. Ben Jones has been one of the best centers in the NFL for the last 3 or 4 years. He finally made his first Pro Bowl this year, which, word around here is that we think he's probably going to retire, unfortunately, because he's had a couple concussion issues here lately, and he's had a good, nice, long career at this point. But he did good work with those guys. I think he made Taylor Lewan better. I think his offensive lines in general, and this is a way that I usually judge coaches over the course of a season, or just judge coaches in general. As the season goes on, does that group get better or worse? And his offensive lines very consistently got better, especially you think about the 2019 season, the 2020 season, even 2021. The Titans really seemed to peak as the season wore on, especially as a running team, and especially as that run blocking unit kind of gelled, because it all, there's always some sort of change within that unit. I don't think they ever just brought back the same 5 from the previous year. So there was always something that needed to be worked in and worked out. And I always thought that the Titans offensive line usually was surging come December and into the playoffs. And to me, I think that's a credit to Keith Carter. And I also think if you want to look at the Henry effect and how much credit that should be given, you should probably look at what he did with Dontrell Hilliard and Deontay Foreman.
Good point.
Last season when Henry was hurt, because the Titans running game did not suffer that much without Derrick Henry. Now, was it quite as good? Probably not. But those guys produced, and that run game helped carry them in a season where they were without Julio Jones for pretty much the whole year. They were without A.J. Brown for parts of that season too. I mean, they were running out some pretty sad wide receivers on that offense, and they were still producing and scoring points and winning games enough to get to the 1 seed in the AFC that season. So I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot to be excited about, frankly, with Keith Carter. I think he is a good coach. I think he'll do well there. The personality stuff, may mesh better with some guys than others, but I think he's a good football coach.
So that takes us, again, everybody, we're joined by Mike friggin' Herndon, baby. You can follow him on Twitter at that very handle, at Mike Herndon NFL. Do great work for Paul Kaharski here, doing all things covering Tennessee Titans. Make sure you guys like the video. Hit subscribe for more juicy content. But now carrying the Derrick Henry stuff to what the Jets have in Breece Hall, a lot of people thought that he was going to be the offensive rookie of the year before he got injured in that Week 7 game. He looked like a friggin' monster. And now you get Keith Carter in here. How can Keith Carter unlock Breece Hall? Because he brings a lot to the table, and he seems on the precipice. He seems on the edge of superstardom.
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll help. I definitely think he will. And I mean, obviously, you guys already had, the outside zone kind of Shanahan,
correct,
style offense, and that's what Keith Carter ran here in Tennessee. So stylistically, I think it's a natural fit. And the Titans, they ran outside zone, they ran inside zone, and they ran duo. That was like their 3 staple runs that you could count on every single week, being like making up about 80% of their run game. And I think that's probably a lot what this will look like, but he is good at teaching the fundamentals and the details of blocking those combinations. And I would encourage Jets fans to go look up there on Twitter. There are some good coaching clinic videos of Keith Carter giving instructions on zone blocking and how those guys need to get out and run and what they want them to do with their hands on cutoff blocks and things like that. There's a lot of videos out there that are really good. And I think Keith Carter is very good. I think he's a very good teacher, and that's primarily what Mike Vrabel wants his coaching staff to be, is teachers. He wants them to be fundamentally sound, that kind of thing, and that's had a lot of success here. Up until last season, obviously, which was there was a lot going on with the end of this season as far as injuries go that kind of left this team with very little chance to succeed. But I think Carter is a good teacher, understands the details of this offense, and will fit right into that coaching staff and that offense the way they want to run it. And I think Breece Hall is gonna have a monster season, especially if AVT and the rest of these offensive linemen get healthy and on the field and clicking. The Jets have a lot of potential in the run game next season, I think.
All right, I'll just push you up against it. I wasn't going to, but hey, here we are. What do you think numbers-wise? What are we talking about? Because, all we could do is imagine, because we only saw the first 7 weeks, and it looked like it was going in a certain direction. We're like, tantalizing, but obviously he was out for the rest of the year, so we didn't see it. He's already back running, so I was like, wow, this guy is, recovering, I guess. Well, what do the kids say? Tiger blood or something? I have no idea what's running through those veins, but he seems to have something going on there. Is there any level of projection, some educated guess on what kind of numbers we could see from a fully healthy Breece Hall in this Keith Carter scheme? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if they're giving him like a full workhorse kind of workload, which I would have to expect that they would be, and frankly, Derrick Henry was really a first and second down back only. I'm sure Breece Hall will get more work on third downs than Henry ever got here. So if they're giving him the full load, I think he's going to have probably 1,800 yards plus running the football. The Titans feed the run game. Now, if they go get Aaron Rodgers and Aaron Rodgers wants to throw the ball 40 times a game, maybe that's a different story. But if they are going to run the ball and play that kind of Shanahan, Titan style offense that we've seen work in the run game for many years now in the NFL, I think Breece Hall is going to put up monster numbers because he's extremely talented, and they've got some really talented offensive linemen. And this scheme works. It just works. I think Keith Carter knows how to teach it and coach it. So I see no reason why Breece Hall couldn't be in the rushing champ discussion next season if everything plays out and everybody stays healthy.
Yeah, I just feel like I wish I had a drink here so I could just go juicy. That sounds juicy. Oh my! I'm on the edge of my seat on that one.
I'll be drafting them in fantasy. I'll tell you that much.
Excellent. There you go. That's the best advice you could have given on this show. Mike, before we get you out of here, a couple of quickies. You joined us the last time. Maybe it was the last time, which, by the way, we need to do these more often. I believe the last time you joined us was following the Corey Davis free agent signing, and we brought on insiders from all the different teams to try to understand what they were getting. And I'll just tell you my experience with Corey Davis, and you tell me if, that's right on course with what he was doing here in Tennessee. This is a guy who will drop a slant during his Jets tenure that we've seen. He'll drop a slant. You're like, what the? And then he makes this crazy one-handed catch by the end zone. And you're like, gee, what's going on here? So a lot of inconsistencies and drops, and more drops really than he's ever had in his career, which was bizarre. Durability. There was all kinds of weird injuries. He seemed like a super durable guy in Tennessee, but we didn't really get that there as well. So just kind of a wild spectrum from that standpoint. And the one thing I remember you saying, because I know Corey Davis, the player, of course, oh yeah, I'm a wide receiver one. But a lot of us went, are you? But he wasn't, but that was okay because what he was supposed to provide didn't have to be that. And the Jets have found their own versions of that already. And Garrett Wilson looks pretty good. So is the Corey Davis experience I just described the same thing that you guys saw for the first bunch of years throughout his rookie contract?
Yeah, I would say inconsistency is probably a fair way to put it. He definitely, he physically looks the part, right? Like he's got the size and build, and like when he's running wide open, like he can go. And look, to me, Corey Davis is a great teammate. He's like a selfless blocker. He puts it on the line for his team every game. So I think he's a great guy to have in your building. I don't think he's a wide receiver one. And frankly, I didn't think he was a wide receiver one when he was here either. I mean, the fact that AJ Brown is obviously one of the best receivers in the NFL, but the fact that he took that spot, he took the wide receiver one mantle from Corey Davis so fast. I mean, it was halfway through his rookie year. It was like very clear AJ Brown is the guy, and Corey Davis is Robin. So, I thought that was a pretty clear indicator that Davis has somewhat of a limited ceiling, but the injuries, something that we did see here, it wasn't necessarily that he missed a ton of games, but I know he played like half a season with turf toe at one point where like his production was really hampered and you could just tell he wasn't the same guy. So he played through some things here that, limited his production. And he also was one of those guys that just seemed like he was constantly on the injury report, like whether it was, a nagging hamstring or, an ankle or whatever. There was just something always, that you were looking at with Corey Davis and you were like, all right, when's the next thing going to break with him? The drops wasn't really an issue here. I mean, occasionally, yeah, but that wasn't a big topic of conversation for him. It was more just, he wasn't like a big time separator as a route runner. He was just okay in that regard. He was more of a, catch and run kind of guy. And, AJ Brown was a better catch and run guy. So honestly, like, and I don't know what the feeling is lately there. I know at one point the general consensus was that he's probably going to get cut this offseason. I'd love to have him back here with the Titans as a wide receiver 2 to Treylon Burks as wide receiver 1, assuming Burks takes that next step and really breaks out next season, which I think will happen here. But I'd love to have him back. I mean, I don't think he's a bad football player. I just don't think he's a wide receiver 1. And he needs to be paid and cast in a role that more adequately suits him rather than, the former 5th overall pick thing. I mean, I think that's kind of why people would get tied up in him as a wide receiver 1. And it's not based on anything that he's actually done in the NFL level for the most part.
But the cap's not bad, and this is why I think there is a consensus, to your point. Zach Rosenblatt of The Athletic joined me on my show about 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, and he said that the consensus in the building from people he's talked to is that they are all walking around assuming that Corey Davis will be a cap casualty. Now, and Zach's got great sources, so I'm not questioning that. I think the one thing to factor in here is this wide receiver free agent class sucks. So, they stink. And Corey Davis, with all due respect, I mean, he's making 10.5, 11 mil. That's, the highest paid wide receiver in football is making 30 mil in Tyreek Hill. We're talking about a third of that. I mean, the money isn't that crazy. The Jets could save a lot if they moved on, but it's not that crazy, which could lead us to this, Mike. I mean, it's just me and you here. No one else is listening. No one else is watching. You want to make a trade? You want to make a deal? It's screw all this cutting and getting somebody for free. I mean, come on, let's negotiate here a little bit. What it sounds like your Titans are hurting for some wide receivers. I am a man of the people. I'm willing to help. What are you offering? What are you giving me? Let's make this reunion happen. We could dust off those Corey Davis Titan jerseys, baby.
Here. Let's pretend like Aaron Rodgers doesn't exist for a minute. How about Ryan Tannehill for Corey Davis straight up? We'll do that.
Oh, I see. That's funny because that was my last thing on Ryan Tannehill, and I got to imagine, a quick detour on that real quick. Is it a foregone conclusion that he's gone? I know Carthon said he wants to assess things before making any of those kind of grandiose decisions, but, he's getting up there, which is kind of crazy. It makes me feel old because I remember when he's a top 10 pick, former wide receiver turned quarterback. So now I just feel old as he's getting old. I'm like, boy, I remember that draft. But anywho, that's neither here nor there. Is it a foregone conclusion that he's gone? Is he cut? Is he traded? What's the future for Tannehill?
I think it's very much up in the air right now. I do kind of take Carthon at his word that he's going to evaluate and kind of see where they're at. I think if you ask them in an ideal world, they would love to have somebody better, somebody that could lift the ceiling of this offense a little bit more than Tannehill does. Because to me, Tannehill's in that class, and I think it's a huge class of players. I think it kind of like Dak Prescott's probably at the high end of it, and then you got like maybe Kirk Cousins and Carr and Tannehill and all these guys on down. That if you put the right supporting cast around him, he can make an offense look pretty good. I mean, he can put up numbers. We saw it in 2019 and 2020. They were scoring at a top 5 rate in the NFL. with Tannehill under center. And Derrick Henry's a part of that, but I can tell you, having watched it firsthand, that is not all Derrick Henry, because Derrick Henry was here before Tannehill, and they didn't look anything like that on offense. So I think Tannehill, in the right situation with the right supporting cast, can be in that like second tier, maybe third tier of quarterbacks. A guy that, to me, like, it's almost like Matt Stafford. You put Matt Stafford with the Rams, you get a totally different result than what you got when you had him with the Lions and a team that just was struggling to support him and surround him with, adequate players and coaching and defense and all the other things. So to me, Tannehill, I think, is a good player, but he is definitely not one of those guys that you're going to be competitive just because he's on your team every single year. And obviously every team in the NFL would love to have one of those quarterbacks. There's only like 4 or 5 of them, I think, really realistically in the NFL right now. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I'm sure they would love to find an upgrade. I don't know that there's a realistic one out there for them this offseason. So I kind of lean towards Tannehill will probably be back and be the quarterback here again next year, because I don't think they want to tank. I don't think they want to do any of that stuff. So I kind of think he's going to be back, but it wouldn't really surprise me if he was gone either. I'm really like probably 60-40 on it at this point.
So you would, all joking aside, Tannehill, Corey Davis, you do that straight up right now?
I might need like a mid-round pick sweetener on that to take on Davis back and to give up a quarterback that I know I can win with.
I see.
Yeah, I might need a little sweetener. Yeah.
Okay. And then what if, so let's take Tannehill off the table. The Jets get some magical quarterback. If the Jets were willing to trade Corey Davis straight up, what's the highest draft pick you would give? Or whatever, what's the real draft pick you'd be willing to give potentially for Davis to come back?
Honestly, I probably wouldn't go anything above like a 4 or 5 for him. Okay. I mean, his contract is fine. I don't think it's crippling or anything. Yep. Last year of his deal, you can get out of it if it doesn't work out. And like you said, the free agent market is absolutely terrible.
It's awful. Yeah.
To me, the Titans desperately need a receiver. They cannot go into the season with the receivers that they have under contract right now. So to me, they almost have to make a trade, because DJ Chark, I mean, come on. I'm not – nobody's getting excited about that here. And look, Treylon Burks, you want him to be your number one. He hasn't proven it yet. Robert Woods, I mean, there's a chance they could just cut Robert Woods, who was not very good for them this year. But that's it. I mean, you got nobody else. There's nothing else there. So they've got to find multiple pieces. They're certainly going to draft one before the end of day 2. But they probably got to sign and or trade for 1 or 2 more too. So I would love to have Davis. I know Davis still has a house here, so I'm sure he wouldn't mind being back. I think it's a good fit, honestly.
Again, phone on vibrate, Mike. You know how to. You got the number. If you want to hit me up and we want to make something happen, my people, your people, we'll make that trade happen, baby. Juicy, beautiful. Well, Mike, I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time. The Corey Davis, Ryan Tannehill, and of course Keith Carter, which was the theme of this episode. Learning more about him, and I guess ending on that. Is there anything we missed on Keith Carter? Again, this is an absolute informational bomb for Jet fans to learn more about Keith Carter. Any story, any nugget, anything we missed on Keith Carter that Jets fans should know before you get out of here?
I think the biggest thing is to me, the Titans offensive line while he was here always was a better run blocking group than they were a pass blocking group. And I don't know how much of that is personnel versus Keith Carter. It's hard to separate sometimes just because, they had a lot of the same personnel throughout his time here, as far as, Lawan, Jones, and Davis were there pretty much the whole time. Left guard and right tackle switched out a little bit, but they were pretty consistently better run blocking than pass blocking. So I'll be interested to see how the Jets offensive line performs under him and kind of get a better feel for how much of that was personnel and how much of that was Keith Carter's, coaching and approach. But honestly, I think Jets fans should be pretty excited about Carter. I think he'll do a good job for them. And I'm looking forward to seeing how the Jets do this year. I think they're an interesting team.
We'll see. Robert Saleh called it a quote-unquote home run hire. I say that about any decision I make, but hey, different strokes, different folks. Mike, you're one of the best in the gosh darn business, baby. Thanks for taking the time, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, man.
There he is, Mike Herndon, and you can follow him on Twitter at that handle, Mike Herndon NFL. Thanks, everyone.